I'm so glad to be here, and I'm very happy that you all have decided to join this program. It's a fabulous program that SUU is using their partnerships to put on for you so you can get some credits. What I was asked to talk to you all about was understanding the fine print. And I looked at that and went, oh my goodness, if you're a detail person, that's like crazy, right? Fine print to what, right? So I've got it encompassed here in the areas of compliance, HR, and safety. And when I was at Blue Bunny, I was also the safety manager. So I know just a little bit about safety, hazmat, and anhydrous ammonia, and weapons of mass destruction, right? Okay, so I'm going to start with a story. And disclaimer, you all know I work for Blue Bunny. Anybody eat Blue Bunny ice cream? All your hands better go up. It's the great stuff. It's the great stuff. So I just moved back here after a 5-year stint in Texas. The ice cream of choice in Texas is Bluebell. Anybody know Bluebell?
It's the best ice cream.
Do you know what happened with Bluebell?
Yeah, it got listeria.
It got listeria. So they got listeria a few years back, about 5 years ago. Listeria is a nasty little microorganism that can lead to a lot of sickness and possibly even death, right? And it did. And when you look at what happened with them, it was all in the details. There was nobody watching the details of how much of that ice cream was flowing onto the floor, how long it was sitting there, how much of the water and the chemicals was sitting there mixed with it, what was growing there, how well they were sanitizing, how well their quality department was pulling the swabs and the sampling and all that kind of stuff. The detail was lacking. It wasn't just on the front line. It was the supervisory line. It was the director line. It was all the way up. Nobody was checking the detail. End of the story, a few people died. So what happens? They close down their plants. They regroup, they have another hit of listeria. They get an investor, they open up, they are fine now if you want to keep enjoying your Bluebell ice cream. However, the moral of that story is, whatever you do is going to impact somebody else down the road. It may not end up in death, but it may end up in something like a lawsuit or just hurt feelings. It may end up in a whole lot of things. We have got to watch the details to everything we're doing. How many of you are managers of people in here? Okay, you can manage yourself pretty well? How about them? How about the people that directly report to you? What do you do with them?
I know sometimes they're a little crazy.
They are a little. Yeah, it happens, right? So let's go through the deck here and learn some more things about HR, if we can get our little thing to work. So some quotes for you, and for those of you in the back that can't see very well, we have Jeff Bezos here. He says, if you don't understand the details of your business, you are going to fail. That's true, just point blank, he doesn't mince. Steve Jobs, details matter. It's worth waiting to get it right. And then Charles Swindoll, the difference between something good and something great is attention to detail. So details matter. And if these folks at this caliber with those successful companies, nobody can dispute that they're successful, are going to tell you that details are important, they're probably important, right? And they're probably a key to success. So when we turn to the area of HR, anybody in HR here? Anybody? Good? Props? Okay, we deal with the legal environment. There's just a few details in that. We deal with total rewards. That's all your comp, all your benefits, all your training, all of that kind of thing. Change management. I don't know why we deal with that. That never happens, right? Diversity, that is getting to be a big topic now. Business structure and sustainability. If you're leveraging your HR people right, they're helping you with that. Safety, and then talent acquisition and management, which is where most people see HR living at, is in those areas. So let's talk about these three main areas that we need to consider. First of all, there's contracts. And I'm going to talk to you with specifics in the HR realm, because at the end of the day, every one of you is an HR manager to some degree. You just have your subject matter experts that have that actual legitimate title. We're going to talk about safety, and we're going to talk about just HR management in general. Surrounded in that is all the legalities and all the compliance that goes into play with those things. Because no matter what you're doing, if something goes sideways, it's all subject to discovery in a court of law, all of it. Right? So it's very important to pay attention to details. So let's talk about some contracts. So in the area of written contracts, you have your benefits. What kind of contract are you signing with your vendors, your brokers, right? What kind of information are you putting out to your employee group? Are you getting the details right with what you really wanted, what you're paying, what they're getting? Are you getting them right? There's this thing called ERISA out there, which is a big law. If you mess it up, there's going to be problems, right? And there's just a ton of detail. And we were meeting with our broker this morning, and it's just a bunch of detail because he's talking about the average wholesale price and rebates and all these things that come into play that we generally associate with maybe buying parts or something like that, but it comes into your benefits. At the end of the day, though, with your benefits program, it's touching you and your employees. Where's the first place you're going to get some pain and kickback from them? Is if you mess with their pay or benefits, right? So details are very, very important. Offer letters. I have seen a few of these not put together quite right in my time. You please just let HR do the offer letters for you, because if you get the language wrong, you could be subject to a contract that you didn't want. You could be subject to a pay amount that you didn't want. You can be subject to a person that you didn't want. I actually, at one point in my career, got a job offer, and then I got a rejection letter right behind it. I had the job, but the lady didn't pay attention to the detail. Her specialist printed out the whole list of rejections, and she just printed my letter in there too. Just left my name on the list. Right? So I was scrambling because I already gave notice. Okay, confidentiality and non-disclosure. Where I came from, we had salespeople, independent sales reps, and they all had a non-disclosure agreement. And some of you may have them, and they need to be honored. And if you're hiring people that have these, you want to look at the fine details of them. So if you have like operations in other states, for instance, if you go out to Texas, that's where I just came from, right? Where your Bluebell ice cream is. Out there, they can write a non-disclosure by the county, and Texas honors it. There's some states that don't honor them at all. You could just be wasting your time writing those. Right? So you need to look at what those details are. When you're hiring somebody, when you're running your own business, what you're doing, what does this non-disclosure say? Who are you giving it to? Where are they coming from if they have one? What does it say? How am I going to operate around this? I have watched people in my little land of food sales hire a sales rep and then go, oh, you have a non-disclosure agreement? Okay, this is what we do. And they still miss the detail. Now what they have is a person on their roster that they're paying, and they have to hide that person because they have this non-compete, non-disclosure thing. They can't really work because they've already touched everything in the area. So you're sitting on payroll for a year, 2 years, whatever the length of it is. So very important to pay attention to those details. Disciplinary actions. Who's done some of those in their time? Those are the best thing ever, right? So they have to be right. And so work with your HR person to make sure you get the details, you get the language right. What do you intend to do? And I'm not going to say much more than that because that's a whole separate class. We could probably stay in here for 8 months talking about all this stuff, but your employer would be upset with me if you weren't there doing your business. Then there's service contracts. So we deal with professional recruiters, aka headhunters. Are you going to sign an exclusive agreement with them where they're the only ones that can work on your jobs? What's the fine print as far as placement and guarantees if the person doesn't work out? How much are you paying these people? They can charge you anywhere from 20 to 40% for a head. Did you check that out before you said, yeah, I like your candidate, send him on in, we're going to hire him? Lots of details. Staffing agencies, the same thing with details. And I'll tell you a little story, and I had this down when I was in St. George. Now, this was a long time ago. This was back in probably 2006, 2007, where I was working with one particular staffing agency, and I went to convert an employee over to regular staff, only to find that he didn't have good documents. Well, my little ire went up because I was really mad that this business partner had not properly screened this individual and sent me someone who was not lawful to work in the United States. This was at the same time that Walmart was going through their big lawsuit because they had the cleaning team that was not theirs. It was contracted, but they weren't legal. They weren't even their employees, but they got a big old slap on the hands. So I went to all of my staffing agencies that I was using, and I had a letter with me that said, I have full rights to audit all your files on the people that you send me and your I-9 status and everything. If you do not comply with the laws, I will not do business with you. And so I made them willingly open their books to me on what they had on the files, or I wasn't going to do business with them, because I cannot have a charge like that. I have a lot of other people that are depending on me for their livelihood. Business has to be viable, right? Scary. And then with Department of Workforce Services, I'm going to tell you this story. They're great. I worked with them. I was on their board. They're great. Well, anybody ever use custom fit dollars? You ever use it? It's great, isn't it? When I first got a custom fit contract from them, of course, we have to send it to legal because the lawyers all want to see it, right? I refused to send it to legal because legal would tear it apart. There is no commitment, really, is there? If I do this training, you're going to give me this money. That sounds like a great deal. Don't be afraid of everything because it's in a contract. Just read it and make sure it's sound. And be careful what you send to your lawyers. Don't tell your lawyers I said that. When you get to the oral side of it, here's the at-will status. Utah is one of the 37 states that's an at-will state, which means you can hire, fire for whatever reason, right? I will tell you that this little disclaimer of Title VII and age discrimination and all these other laws out there probably erase that to some degree, right? So be careful with the at-will status and what the details are when you're disciplining, training, or doing any kind of an employment action with somebody. Compensation is another thing. If you call them on the phone and you're giving them a job offer and you're quoting them compensation, it really needs to be accurately said. Otherwise, you can get yourself into something you don't really want to deal with. And then verbal offers as well. Again, turn it over to your HR person because we are trained to say, Larry, we would like to offer you the employment position of lump pending you're passing a background check and a drug test. If you leave the drug test thing off or the background check off, they could claim that it didn't count when they didn't pass those things to your standards. They could say, well, I didn't know about that. I thought I just had the job. And there is a case on the books where that happened to a gentleman. He went and quit his job. He did not pass his background check, and the courts held in his favor because he was offered the job. He didn't know he had to pass a background check, that it was a stipulation. So just leave it to HR. Let them do it. Lots of details you've got to get in there. And a lot of these things that I'm telling you, on one hand, they're no-brainers, but that's because I live in the world of HR. But to the common person who is your frontline manager, purchasing manager, sales manager, whatever, they're like, you don't give it a second thought. There's no second thought because you're not versed in that land and seeing those things. So lots of details. Let's talk about safety. Very near and dear to my heart. Mr. Staley back here, I worked with his brother. He knows I was a safety manager, and I'm kind of persnickety about it. But let's just look at these OSHA annual statistics. This is 2017. I just saw 2018 just came out, and it's pretty much the same as 2017. But you look at this, 5,147 fatalities from work-related injuries, 99 plus a week, 14 of them a day. Somebody's missing details, right? Almost 3 million non-fatal workplace injuries and illnesses a year in the United States. So those details on that, what were they performing their job wrong? Was something maintenance wrong? Did they not pay attention to the details of just coming and bringing their brain to work that day? We don't know, right? Then you have all the details of, did we file their claim right? Did we handle them right? Did we end up in a lawsuit over it? So more details need to come into play with this because of these injuries. The cost, and you all know this already, training and replacement of employees, the accident investigation process and the corrective measures, right? All of that is costing you time, money. Lost productivity, you've got a person down, they can't do their job. So now you've got to get somebody else, and if you have not built a bench for that, it's going to be even more painful because you've got to bring somebody up to speed. And at best, you've got SOPs that they're navigating. That's tough, right? That's really tough. Repairs of damaged equipment and property, oh my goodness, what did they break, right? What broke in this? I had truck drivers. Sometimes they'd go out and get in an accident. I had a guy coming through Austin, Texas on one of the beltways on the outside. And right when he crested this hill, the road turned at the same time, and it turned into an intersection with a stoplight. The sun was in his eyes. A man in a pickup truck pulled out from the light because it just turned green, and that man got T-boned. He did not die, but he sure was wrecked up and in the hospital for a while. Details. And then costs associated with lower employee morale and absenteeism. That does nobody any good. And believe me, the employee really doesn't want to be at home. If you've ever put anybody on short-term disability in like 3 days, they're calling you going, really, do I have to stay here because I'm bored, right? Yeah, nobody likes this at all. So there's a lot of cost to that, and if that's the only place you can get to manage these details on safety is what is it going to cost me, please just go there. To me, it's a moral thing, but if all you can do is wrap your head around costs, because it's not moral to you, wrap your head around costs and keep them safe. And I'll tell you, I had a young man here, you want to talk about details, and this is crazy because y'all like stories. I had a gentleman, he was in our freezer warehouse. It went up 4 stories, so lots of ice cream in there, right? If they went up in the forklift with the cage around it to adjust a pallet of ice cream or whatnot, they had to stay in the cage. You can't come out of the cage unless you're roped off. You have to stay in the cage. So he goes and he gets in the cage. The guy driving the lift says, you're going to stay in the cage. Yes, I'll stay in the cage. I mean it, you got to stay in the cage. I'll stay in the cage. You have to stay in the cage. I'll stay in the cage. Okay, up it goes, out of the cage he comes. And they just, I cannot make this stuff up. They just went up 1 level. So when we brought him down to do the detail of the coaching and counseling with him, we said, what were you thinking? Because we want a lesson here, right? We want you to understand what you're doing. What were you thinking? Here were his details. Well, I don't see what the big deal was because I was only 8 feet up. And I said, well, you could have fallen and you could have hurt your head, your neck, anything. But it was only 8 feet up. I'm 6 feet tall. It's a 2-foot fall. I can't make it up. I cannot make it up. Cannot make it up. Yeah. Can't make it up. There's your money thing. Do you want to be a piece of this $1 billion a year? Manage your details and safety. That's just the workers' comp cost. Okay, so going on with the safety, I love the safety. Your policy development. How do you have your policies written? Are you in line with what OSHA needs? Are you going above and beyond what OSHA requires? And ANSI. Are they palatable to the point where a person can actually understand what you wrote in there? If you just pitch the lockout tag out right out of the CFR, nobody understands that. Confined space is even worse, right? So you got to put it in terms where they can understand it. Watch those details so you can train them and they can understand what's going on. That bleeds over to the training. What are your details of training? Are you a company that says, you know what, we really don't have a lot of time because time is money and we got to get our widgets out the door. So we're going to put them all on a computer terminal. And compliance-wise, we check the box because we can show that they logged in and we can show they went through it and we can show they took the test. But can you show that they understood it? Can you show that their heart is in it? Or would it probably be better to do something in person and train them on those kind of things? It's a dilemma. It's a dilemma. Record keeping. You have got to have good records. If OSHA comes in the door, you're going to want to have your records ready. If you don't have records, it never happened, right? It never, ever happened. So make sure you've got your training in order. Make sure you've got your discipline in order. If you have an incident, even if it's a near miss, make sure you can show where you or somebody went through and audited that and did some follow-up as far as what is your action plan to maybe resolve that issue and have it all together. All these details. It all involves a 4-letter word called time. But you're going to, pay me now or pay me later, right? The corrective actions we talked about a little bit, and then the audits. You have to inspect what you expect on things. Otherwise, people are going to just run rampant and do whatever. If we didn't have that really solid guy driving that forklift, we would not have known that this guy was going to fall down 2 feet, right? Because we just wouldn't have known that happened. So we had little, at the Blue Money plant, we had all of our people were developed as mini safety managers, and they all could call you out on the carpet on it. They all could do it because they were trained to that level. You have to do your audits. You have to make sure things are right. You have to. Okay. Then there's quality and security. So I was closely attached to the quality people, but I was security in a few places as well. But you've got to look for the health of the consumer. If you're making a food product, what's the health of consumer? If you are not making a food product and you're making machinery that's going to process food product, is it going to, are the bearings going to scrape and end up in the food? What's going to happen here, right? So what's the health and well-being of your consumer? when you're dealing with your quality and safety? Are you going to injure that consumer? What's the impact on your business partners? If you mess up your quality, what's going to happen to people upstream and downstream from you as far as their business? What happened to all the dairy farmers for Bluebell when they shut down? They had a little bit of milk on their hands, right? All the sugar, all the everything was there. What happened downstream? Bluebell's a phenomenon in Texas. Here, we just go buy ice cream, right? Oh, you don't have my favorite, I'm just going to buy ice cream. There, people quit buying ice cream. So the grocery stores suffered in that category. So what's going to happen upstream and downstream? You've got to think about your chain. And then the security of your employees. And I'll tell you 2 other stories I have here. When I was at the food distributor in Texas, I had a lady, we transferred her in from another location. She was a buyer. She was a senior buyer. We called her a COP buyer, center of the plate, meat, right? And she had a 19-year career with us already at this other facility. She came in, she couldn't handle our facility. It was a very tough facility to work in. So she started getting put under the gun with her monitoring her and managing her performance. She got stressed one day. It was their job as category managers that when some kind of meat was going out of code date, that they shuffle it off to the freezer before it runs out, just like we do when we go off to the store and we buy meat. We get it in the freezer before that sell-by date is over, right? She took a bunch of bacon, because you have to remember they're buying it in trailer loads. It needed to go, or else it's going to go waste, and that was going to put her in the bad list because it was a lot of money. And she did what she had to do in the computer to get it to shuffle over there. It was so far out of code date. Would it have made somebody sick? If it wasn't for a young man on the dock, a warehouse worker, not trained in any of that other than I'm going to look at this date, we would have put that in there in the freezer, and somebody could have selected it and sent it out to one of our customers. You would have came in there with your 2-year-old, and somebody could have got sick. Details, right? Security issue. I had a sales manager. I don't know what happened to this guy. He went a little crazy. So he wasn't performing his job well, and so he ended up getting on the whole performance improvement plan, and then we ended up exiting him from the company. Up on Facebook pops this whole stuff about how he's after my regional president and he is the intercessor for God and he is going to call him into, and me, I'm security. My hackles are up and I'm ready. I spent the entire weekend with corporate security and Travis County Sheriff Department tracking this guy. Where is he? What's he doing? Looking at his Facebook page. Then we had a big food show. Looks like a job fair. You just got food vendors everywhere, and you get one of the big hotels and you do it in there, right? We had to put out alerts for him to make sure that he didn't show up anywhere. He kept making these threats. We had a sales meeting. So all our salespeople are coming from all over Texas, going to come into the facility. Well, that is violence in the workplace, just ripe, ready, easy to happen, right? So we had to put armed security on. But we couldn't make everybody nervous. So they had to be undercover. So these different things that you have to do, you have to watch the details. Had I slacked off at any point during that weekend, he could have done whatever he needed to do or wanted to do in that facility. Now let's fast forward. I had some security guards. They were not mine. I'm just going to put that disclaimer right there. A few weeks after he exited, I walk out, my office was right by the door by the security entrance where the employees came in. Security guard, I'm leaving. Security guard goes, your visitor is here. I don't have a visitor. I'm like, who is it? And I could see through his window, I see 2 ladies sitting there. He said, that's this guy's wife and daughter. My heart just sank because maybe he's not going to show up, but maybe they're mad because daddy doesn't have a job anymore. No warning. That security guard knew that guy was gone. He knew that he was causing drama. He knew we had armed security in there. He knew all of that. But he didn't watch the detail to say, I'm going to call Chris first and say this person is here. Details. Bad things could happen, right? Okay, so human resources, more small print, Alan Schweier. Human capital is a core corporate asset, just like financial and physical assets. As such, it must be managed the way companies manage other assets. This requires thinking strategically about how to invest in human capital and figure out how to, and I put that in red, optimize and measure its return. So I was asked a long time ago by my very first professor in HR 101, who's in our class because you like people? And all these hands went up. And she said, if you're in HR because you like people, you need to get a different profession. And I'll just tell you the long and the short of it, my hand did not go up. I love you all, right? However, our employees are another asset to make sure the details are handled so we can stay sustainable and so can upstream and downstream. That's what it is. It's an asset. You are bringing on an asset. The difference between a human and a piece of machinery is you lube a machine, right? You feed a person. You take the machine down for PMs. You give the person vacation. It's another asset. It's another asset. So we have to pay attention to those details of that. So let's talk about some of the drivers of this. So we've been through some of the technical stuff. So some of the drivers, start with your selection decisions. It goes all the way back to who you're hiring. How did you make that decision? Who made that decision? What did you base it on? Was it objective, or was it, that guy really smiled at me or gave me some good politically spun answers, so I like him. I'm going to bring him in. Or was there really a match to what that job needed? Did you really critically think through that? Whether he was your brother's, cousin's, sister's, whatever, it doesn't matter. Then when they got their training and development, did you have the right onboarding program? Did you put them through the right training? Or did you just expect that because he went to Purdue, that he knows what he's doing? I had that situation too. Before we exited him, we called him boogers because he would take boogers and wipe them under his desk. He was a supervisor. Gross. Yeah. After the training and development, did you manage the performance? The performance management process is an ever-living cycle. It's not the performance review. It's not the one time I stopped you in the hallway. It is ongoing conversations, some formal, some informal, right? Did you manage that performance well so that you could get what you were expecting from this person? That, if you do that right, is going to bleed over to them having ownership. They need to have ownership of what they're doing. Their accountability, are you holding them accountable? They need to be accountable. It doesn't mean you have to beat them up every time. It does mean that if something goes wrong, you need to talk about it and how we're not going to do it again, right? And then are you driving commitment? Commitment's a big one. And then when you're driving commitment, is it commitment that, yeah, I really love being here and I want to be here? Or is it commitment because nobody else will have me because I'm not a good employee, so I'm going to stay here because Sally lets me get away with whatever I want to do? When you have commitment, you got to define your commitment. From there, do they have the right values? What's the psychological contract you made with these people? So when you join a company and they hired you, you had one idea of what you were going to get from this relationship. They had another one. Does it match? You have to make sure that matches. Otherwise, you're going to get this crazy deviant behavior, or you just might get lucky. That happens on occasion. And then the leadership quality. If you've selected well, at the end, you're going to get those things right. Does that make sense? Okay. So in your selection decisions, you want to look at their experience, of course, right? You want to look at these three things: manageability, willingness, and ability. Whenever I'm interviewing somebody, I'm looking for those three things. If they're not manageable, I don't want them. Because guess what? You're going to come in my office and say, Chris, we picked this person, he's not manageable, help me. Now there's more details I have to pay attention to that I shouldn't have had to pay attention to if we would have paid attention to the details in the first place, right? If he's not able, that's a given. If they're not willing, that's a given. And people do come like that. They do come like that. So you want to watch those three things. And then you want to look for the cultural fit/add. Everybody talks about this fit, but when you're looking at this person that you're hiring, are they filling in the gaps that you don't have? Or are you hiring everybody that's just like you? So you're going to have these gaps. We like to hire people that are just like us because it's easier. It's just easier. It's not hard to manage that person. They're like me. They're just going to do what I do. If you get that diversity in there, you're going to get different details handled, because it's the stuff you don't do. So you're going to want to have a well-defined job description. If you don't have them, I highly suggest you get them, because they are the cornerstone of everything HR, is that job description. You can't build training programs. You can't defend yourself legally. You can't do any of those things without a good job description. Your interview questions, please go behavioral-based. Ask them about a time when, because if they've never done it before, you don't know if they're going to be able to do it for you in the future. You want an example, right? Assessments. What assessments are you using and why? Are you using a personality profile? Are you using a math test? What are you using? And can you justify why it's in there? And how are you using it? It can't be the be-all, end-all. That's not a lawful decision. But how are you using these assessments? And are you using them consistently? Know the legal protocol. There's a lot of laws that come into play when you're hiring somebody. Title VII is one of them, right? You've got the Immigration Reform and Control Act. You've got the National Labor Relations Act falls into it as well. We don't deal with that very much out here, but it's there. So know what the legal arena is and what those details are. And then your documentation. Everything you write down is discoverable in a court of law. So please don't be writing down that this person has 2 kids and they have a certain religious and political affiliation on the margin of your paper. And then keep it. Because if you ever have to defend yourself, you're going to want to pull those papers out and please give it to HR. Because the subpoena process is a lot smoother if you can just get it, right? Instead of the judge wondering what's lying around in everybody else's desk and wants to subpoena everybody's desk now, right? So make sure you have your documentation in tip-top shape. It's all about the details, all about the details. Training and development. We talked a little bit about orientation and onboarding. That is so key. It doesn't matter how seasoned that person is. You need to induct them into your culture. You need to let them know what your policies are. That's the rules of your society. Then when you onboard them, you need to show them how you do things. Even though they have experience, they may not know how you go about doing a purchase of something. Where do you get office supplies? These very simple things that we forget because we've been somewhere for a while. Do that well. Your job training as well. Make sure you're doing some job training. Even though it may feel a little bit remedial to them, make sure you go through it. You don't know what the last guy taught them, didn't teach them, right? Cross-training. The details in the cross-training. You will be more viable, especially if you're in a manufacturing operation, if you've got 3 deep on your line. 3 deep, because when somebody leaves, you're there. But you've got to track that cross-training and know who's got what. And what they're doing, who's doing the training, how good of a trainer are they. Developmental opportunities, are you giving those to your folks? All of you all are sitting in this room. Somebody believes in you. So what are you doing with your other folks? The people around you. It doesn't even have to be someone directly reporting to you. What are you doing with a peer? What are you doing with a manager? When you leave here, do you go back to your manager and talk to them about what you're learning here? It's an organic learning process. Stretch assignments. Let people stretch. Somebody believed in you. I'm sure some of you have gotten these before. What are the details? What's the purpose? What am I going to train them on? What kind of assignment am I going to give them? Don't just say, oh, they don't know any of this, so I'm not going to give it to them. People will surprise you. And then teach backs. Just what I was talking about. When you go back, tell somebody what you learned today. It'll solidify it in you, and it'll help them grow a little bit too, right? Then you talk about your training methods and your trainers. We talked about the whole computer-based training. You know, there's pros and cons to it. Know what those pros and cons are. Know what you're getting out of it. Know what details it's covering. Is it just compliance, or do you really mean it? In our ice cream plant, we took it down every year. We took an entire plant down every year, the first day of the year, right after New Year's, January 2nd. No running production. Those of you in production know that that's kind of expensive. And what we would do is nothing but safety and quality training for the entire day. Everybody came in. Safety and quality training. So we got all our compliance training done. They got it with live trainers who loved and cared about them, right? Some of them were doing the training, so they had the ownership in it. And we didn't have to worry about taking the lines down a whole rest of the year and how we're going to get this training done. So we ate it once, and we covered a whole bunch of stuff. So we were safe from a safety and quality perspective. The development of your SOPs and the training content, I highly recommend having a system of SOPs so that you don't get caught in a detriment where someone left, or that you can show people easily how to do a job if they want to cross-train into it, or if you have to hop in there, because you probably don't remember, right? Have those. And then, what's your process to select the trainees for all these training programs? Who wants to do it? You know, when I was at Blue Bunny, you get a lot of stories there. I was there for 10 years. I built a cross-training program. I built a pay-for-skill program for them. They all had to go up their career ladder in whether they were on the production line or in the freezer, in maintenance, whatever it was. But they all had to pick something that was outside of their department to specialize in, all of them. Whether that was going back into the blending unit or going onto the maintenance team or going over to the freezer warehouse, all of them had to pick something. We just had them pick one. It was their interest, and they picked, and we would develop them in that area too. And then you got to manage the details. I trained you these 2 months on that, but now I'm not going to put you over there for 8 months. They won't remember. So then you have to have the system of integration, right? Have to have a system of integration. And then sign-off sheets. If they didn't sign off, it never happened. And I'll tell you, those sign-off sheets, when they come and say, you know what, I didn't know I was supposed to clean the ice cream off the floor, and now these people have listeria. I didn't know. All you gotta do is say right here. You had the training, and then you're defended in court because you can show they had the training if you have to terminate them or whatever, right? Okay. Performance management, a whole nother one. I'm going to whip through this one because I hit it already. Your one-on-ones, what's the quality, what's the interval? Mentoring, are you going to have peer mentoring and supervisor mentoring? Get everybody in the boat, that's what I say. Informal discussions, performance reviews, the coaching actions, and then performance improvement plans. Don't shy away from any of this. We don't want to be confrontational. Don't shy away from any of this. It's just a conversation that you have to make sure that that person knows what the expectations are. Your hope through any of this is to build a viable employee, not to put them on a bad list and get them out. Though that's what it comes to sometimes, right? Think of the time intervals between your events. I had my team, I built a performance management process down there, and the performance review part, they said, we want to do it every 2 months. I said, really? Every 2 months? And they said, we want to do it every 2 months. I said, can we just do it quarterly? Every 2 months. I said, all right, here's the deal, guys. We're going to do it every 2 months. But you're going to do it for a whole year. I'm not changing it. And they looked at me and they're like, well, why? Because they're red people. They want to keep changing everything, right? Everything's new and fancy. And I said, because if we go less than a year, I won't know if it was not a feasible program or time interval, or you just didn't like the change that we were putting in. So they came to me about 7 months in. I remember my supervisor in the warehouse, he was leaning on the door, Healy, I can't keep up. I said, you picked it every 2 months, dude. And I started doing the revision, right? And at a year, we changed it. But I held him to it. What kind of forms you're using, what kind of measurements. People don't like that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 thing because we associate it with a grade. If that's your culture, that's fine. But some people want a word that says you're a top performer, a medium performer, whatever. Think about that and what culture you want. What are the details to that? And then your language. What is your language like? You know, all of my coaching forms, and with the few anomalies, they say any further violations of company policy, procedure, or job performance may lead to further disciplinary action up to and including termination. I don't care if it's a verbal warning. The only times I don't do that is when the guy is just really bad and you can see the writing on the wall. Next one's going to be termination. That's it. So you got to watch all these details that you're putting in there because that's a contract. It's an agreement. So, two-directional impact. We have things that are innate and we have things that are inspired, right? And so ownership, accountability, and a commitment. I talked briefly about that. Some people have ownership. Some people hold themselves accountability. Some people are naturally committed to what they're doing. Other people, you have to inspire that in them. So what are the details you're going to do as a coach to make sure that you are inspiring this every day? First of all, you got to come wired with it, right? And then help them. And that accountability is another one that resoundingly gets pushed off because we don't want to confront somebody. We have got to hold people accountable. Again, that does not mean that you're putting them on a performance plan. It doesn't mean anything more than you went and at least talked to them and said, hey, this went wrong. Help me understand how did this happen. Okay, now how do we prevent that in the future? It could be that simple, but you can't just sweep it under the rug. There's a fallacy there. You can't just sweep it under the rug. And then what inspires things? People's values, the psychological contract you gave them, and the leadership quality of you. That is going to drive their motivation to detail, right? And if you're talking about the whole values thing, there's been research out there that shows if you have their values, their personal values aligned with the organization values, you're going to get more of an impressive employee. Those two have to match. So what do you do with that? In the interview process, you can start exploring some of your questions with your value statement and assess how do they match with the values. Assess those. And then this is kind of the chart that shows it. You can see the high organizational values and high personal values gives you a much higher number of commitment. So that's what you're going to want. And so it's a balancing act. So here's your homework. It's a balancing act of what you're doing and how you're doing it across the people, across the processes, and across your procedures. And that's one of the Chris Healy-isms, is the what and the how. I'll wander around saying that all the time to people, what and how. Because I can coach you, that's the what, but how I do that is going to make all the difference between whether you feel beat up or you feel like you're a valued member of the team. So we have to work on the how. And that how is going to play into what your culture is. Right? If you want to be the overbearing overlords of this, this type of organization, that's a different how than if we want to build a culture of involvement and inclusion and stability. Very different. Very different. Interestingly, people is relationship, process and procedures is task. And when you get to your card on the back, I'm going to let you guys take the card and do some reflection. It's a balance between relationship and task. And when you do personality profiling on people, you find that that's two ends of a continuum. People are generally either very relational or they're very task-oriented. You can see it in the people you work with, right? How do you get that to the middle? That's the question. How do I get this to the middle? Because you can't just be friends with Joe Bob because you have to coach him today, right, and be highly relational. You have to focus on those procedures and processes. But you can't just focus just on the data and what happened there, because there's always this qualitative thing that happened behind it. And what's the person and how do you keep them intact? So there's a balancing. There's a balancing that takes place. And then here's some books that I highly recommend. Crucial Conversation's been out there forever. It's been out there forever. I'm listening to one now, if you all have listened to their influencer book. That is a really dynamic book. Flipping the Switch, that's a second book behind one called The Question Behind the Question that's very skinny. And Miller writes this very well. It's excellent for going in and helping people to understand what's going on behind the question, what's the other thing we need to do, right? And flipping the switch to proactivity and ownership. It's very good. The Why at Work, our buddy David Ulrich up in Alpine, he's the godfather of all HR stuff. Him and his wife wrote this book. It's very compelling if you haven't read it. It tells you why people go to work. It gives you all the psychological of why they go to work. It's very well written. It's easy to read. And then there's the Crucial Accountability, which is by these people that did Crucial Conversations. And this book will give you guidance on how to hold people accountable if you struggle with that and why we need to do it. And again, they write the book very easy to read if you haven't read any of their books. So I highly recommend those.
What was the other one you said?
That's not on there?
Yeah.
Question Behind the Question. QBQ. Very skinny books. And if you want another one, The 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey, it's an old book. It's like not taking people's problems. You got to help them through it, right? Have you read that one? Yeah, it's great. Okay, details on the how. So this is a tiny thing. On the side, it says influences. Here's your foundation. And it says what we think builds to what we say, builds to what we do, and builds to how we're perceived. You do that with your employees. You do that with the people around you. So stop to think about what you're thinking and how that's coming out in your actions. And how are you managing all the detail to this from a psychological, a process, and a procedural standpoint. It's a lot of details. You'll be on overload later. So that drives understanding, gives you the Hawthorne effect. Anybody familiar with the Hawthorne effect? IBM did the study. They wanted to adjust the lighting to get people more productive, right? So they adjust the lighting and they found out had nothing to do with the lighting. It had everything to do that there was now management and all these people down on the floor paying attention to people while they were doing that project that raised their productivity and their engagement. So pay attention to people. Pay attention to them. Job satisfaction, you want to drive that, and commitment and ownership we talked about, and then you have your details accomplished. You've got them engaged. You've got to get them here. You got to get them here. If I put you on overload? No? You want some ice cream now? Page, Arizona. This is where you can get it. So that's the end of that. I want to say thank you for being here. Do you all have any questions? Yes, sir.
How'd the story end with the wife and daughter coming to your office unannounced?
So they came in and I was just like, oh no. And so I'm a military brat and a military spouse. So I have big brothers. Not a whole lot of people scare me. But I just asked them what they needed and they said, we want to get my dad's 401k plan and the information for it. And I didn't know who they were at first. I didn't know, and I said, well, who are you? Oh, we're so-and-so's daughter and spouse. I said, well, he's going to need to call the corporate office to get that, and it'll be sent to him anyway, so we can't give that to you. And they went away. Yeah, they went away. But it was a little sketchy there because you didn't know. If you read those Facebook posts, you would shudder. I had never seen anything like that. And he wasn't the only one. I've had other people that have done death threats and just different things. So you've got to be alert to these things. So when your HR person starts acting nuts, she can't tell you what's really going on. You just have to trust that she's doing the right thing, or he. Yep. What else? Did I overload you? A test? Did somebody say they want a test? I'm coming to your organization here in about 6 months. I'm going to talk to all your employees. Yeah, see how you're doing. Anyway, y'all have been great. On the back of the card, I highly encourage you to answer those questions because it's a self-reflection. And I guarantee you, if you do that right and you take it to your business leaders and say, let's have a frank discussion about this, you're going to get some change in your organization for the positive because those are the things that really make it matter. Okay? Awesome. Thank you.